The Ganymede hypothesis. Ganymede is Jupiter's largest moon. There is compelling reason to believe that Ganymede was the first place within our system to be inhabited by modern humans. The Ganymede hypothesis arose in 2012 and 2013 from a study that Theodore Haldane and Troy McLaughlin had undertaken in an effort to incorporate recent NASA JPL Mars images into a coherent theory of human origins. What quickly became apparent was that human and solar system origins have to be studied together. That is, there is no making sense of the one or the other separately. The two big keys to this sort of understanding were planetary axis tilts and relative eye sizes. An analysis of these two sets of data strongly indicated that in recent prehistoric times, our system was in the form of a double system, that is, a very bright northern system consisting of our present Sun, Jupiter, and its moons, Mercury, and possibly a couple of other things, and a very dark southern system consisting of Saturn, Neptune, Mars, Earth, the bodies with the roughly 26-degree axis tilts, as well as other bodies which may have been in orbit around Saturn rather than in the electromagnetic alignment of the main bodies. The old creatures of the Earth, including pretty much all dinosaurs, all hominids, and a number of creatures such as lemurs, tarsiers, owls, bush babies, etc., that are basically leftovers, still walking or flying around, all have the kinds of huge eyes that you would associate with a very dark kind of an environment, unlike what we observe on Earth today. The existence of a group of main planets with roughly the same axis tilts indicated that those bodies had been captured as a group. Also indicated was that those bodies had amounted to an electromagnetically aligned linear system rather than an orbiting system like our present system. That linear alignment of planets had flown into the plane of the Sun-Jupiter system from the south at a rough 26-degree angle, and as the individual bodies were captured and began to orbit as they do now, ordinary gyroscopic force caused them to keep that 26-degree angle of approach in the form of axis tilts. Gravity is by 40 orders of magnitude the weakest force in nature. The idea that gravity mainly controls what we see in the heavens, that is, the so-called gravity-only cosmology, is a habit of thinking more than anything which could ever be demonstrated. In real life, asking gravity to form up a solar system from swirling dust or to hold a spiral galaxy together is like asking the littlest kid in the school to do the powerlifting event. That is basically nonsensical. In real life, it is the electromagnetic forces which are 40 orders of magnitude stronger than gravity that do the heavy lifting. There is, for instance, no reasonable way to claim that gravity could ever create a supercluster of galaxies such as our own local supercluster, which is called Laniakea. Another habit of thinking which turns out to be wrong is the idea of stars being thermonuclear engines. A thermonuclear furnace star would simply keep on getting cooler as you moved further away from its core. Our sun does not do that. It gets vastly hotter as you move upwards from the surface into the upper layers. Likewise, a sunspot is a place where the electrical activity on the surface breaks down, and you are seeing into the interior of the star. If our sun were a thermonuclear furnace, a sunspot would be blue or white and not black. The interior of the sun is obviously cooler than the surface. What turns out to be the case is that stars are basically light bulbs and not thermonuclear furnaces. Stars are plasma physics phenomena powered by cosmic Birkeland currents. This includes both main sequence stars such as our Sun and dwarf stars such as Jupiter and Saturn used to be. How is that? All ancient religions were astral in nature. The curious name associations between ancient pantheon gods and our planets are primordial. Primitives seeking to devise an astral religion from scratch in our own world, in our own age, would invariably end up worshipping the sun, the moon, and possibly Venus. However, the two chieftain gods of all ancient religions were the two former dwarf stars, Jupiter and Saturn, and particularly Saturn. Vestiges of that ancient reality still surround us. We still call our Sabbath Saturn's Day. The main religious festival in ancient Rome was Saturnalia. Virgil notes in the Aeneid that Rome itself was built over the top of the remains of a more ancient city called Saturnia. Plato consistently refers to antediluvians as nurslings of Kronos, that is Saturn. Classical authors, including Hesiod and Ovid, refer to a golden age when Kronos, or Saturn, was the king of heaven. In the same language, our sun is the king of heaven now. When a dwarf star is captured by a main sequence star, the dwarf star dies out and becomes a gas giant planet. It is as if a 200-foot lightning rod was glowing in a storm, when of a sudden the Acme Lightning Rod Company's truck rolled up and employees got out and constructed a 1,000-foot lightning rod a couple of 100 feet away. The smaller lightning rod, no longer the focal point of any kind of a discharge, would simply go out and cease glowing. Another funny thing which has turned up is that the most normal situation for gas giant planets in our galaxy is for them to be substantially closer to main sequence stars which they orbit than Jupiter or Saturn are now, hence the term hot Jupiters, which we read. At least one scholar who studied such things, that is John Cook, claimed to have done calculations putting Jupiter a bit closer to our sun than the Earth is now in past ages. That would, of course, transform Ganymede, Jupiter's largest moon, from its present status as an icy wasteland into a freshwater ocean world. Space is a plasma environment and not a vacuum. There are charge separations across vast regions of space, and because of those charge separations, we see Birkeland currents arcing across huge regions. Those are most commonly pictured as twisted pairs of currents which look like RNA-DNA spirals. Where those currents cross each other, there's electrical short-circuiting and what are called Z-pinches, and those electromagnetic pinches do have the power to agglomerate plasma into much more solid objects, including stars and other cosmic objects. A Birkeland current with such objects showing at its pinch points is called a Herbig-Haro object or Herbig-Haro string, and looks like a shish kebab with the shishes all lit up, or a string of Christmas tree lights with the string pulled taut. Herbig-Haro strings. Again, the electromagnetic pinch points of a Birkeland current actually do have the power to agglomerate the plasma of space into much more solid objects, typically protostars and stars. A Birkeland current with such objects showing at those pinch points is called a Herbig-Haro object, and I prefer to use the term Herbig-Haro string, since obviously more than one object is involved. Such a string of cosmic objects resembles a string of Christmas tree lights which has been pulled taut. Most such strings appear to be fairly straight. The strings do not stretch to infinity. The strings shown below appear to have end caps which might be double layers or some other kind of plasma physics phenomenon. Nearly totally straight interior section. Another example. The Ganymede hypothesis involves a description of the beginnings of our own solar system as such a Herbig-Haro string. That string included our present sun, roughly in the middle, Jupiter on the right side, or system north, and the Saturn, Neptune, Mars, Earth group on the left, system south. The 26-degree angle. Again, most of these Herbig-Haro strings appear to be reasonably straight. Nonetheless, the Saturn, Neptune, Mars, Earth's southern part of our own system appears to have broken off at a roughly 26-degree angle from the rest of the early system. A related piece of that same puzzle is the question of whether the southern system originally approached the Sun-Jupiter system in a straight line as the entire system would have originally appeared, or along some kind of a spiral path as Troy McLaughlin has previously claimed. Troy's idea of what happened originally still makes a great deal of sense to me. The system originally formed up as a single Herbig-Haro string, which was moving towards its own system north, that is, in the direction from Saturn through our Sun and towards Jupiter. Jupiter was simply never really far enough away from the Sun to prevent being captured by it. The Sun captured Jupiter along with its moons, but in doing so was slowed in its motion towards the north, allowing the southern system to eventually catch up with it. So far, so good. The first humans on Earth, Cro-Magnon people living in the neighborhood of Australia, were culturally sophisticated but not technologically sophisticated. They did not have wheels, and there's no way to believe that they had space vehicles that came to Earth via space vehicles. What that leaves is the idea of an electrical water bridge, such as you see in physics experiments on YouTube. What that requires is as follows. All of the objects of the original string were still in a reasonably straight line. The southern system approached the Sun-Jupiter system in a straight line, Earth first and then the other bodies, with Saturn probably last. An electrical water bridge formed between Earth and Ganymede, which was on the edge of that system even as Earth was on the edge of the southern system. Humans and other aquatic mammals transferred from Ganymede to Earth and presumably splashed down in the Pacific Ocean. Other aquatic mammals, in accordance with symbiotic relationships that were common at the time, seeing that the humans could not survive in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, shepherded the humans to Australia. All of that was a few tens of thousands of years ago. Thus, the Ganymede hypothesis is basically compatible with an out-of-Australia theory. The idea of a transfer via a water bridge forces me to believe that the original approach of the Saturn system was on a straight path and not a spiral. I cannot picture such a water bridge forming between Ganymede and something which was crossing the path of Ganymede on a spiral path. And then, Earth and Ganymede did not simply keep moving towards each other after the water bridge event. That would have resulted in a gigantic collision which nothing would have been likely to survive. Rather, the entire southern system recoiled and bounced back away from the Sun-Jupiter system. Same electromagnetic charges, and did this in a manner similar to what you see in the case of train wrecks, in which groups of cars that can no longer travel forwards into cars blocking them recoil outwards, so that you see angles between sections of the trains. The best way to picture this is to think of a train wreck. 26-degree angle. Beyond that point in time, the partial Herbig-Haro string that comprised the southern system lay at a 26-degree angle from the general line that had previously been the center line of the entire system. That also says that when the southern system reversed and approached the Sun-Jupiter system a second time, it did so on the spiral approach that Troy McLaughlin had described earlier. The order in which those bodies now approached the Sun-Jupiter system was probably Earth first, then Mars, Neptune, and finally Saturn. Earth was captured by Jupiter, and the entire sequence of catastrophes that we're familiar with ensued. What I have just described is basically what a young solar system looks like, an electromagnetically aligned system and not an orbiting system like our present system. Local creation. Other versions of a theory of the capture of the Saturnian system by our Sun involve claims of the Saturn system wandering into the neighborhood of our Sun From the depths of space, one such actually involving a claim that Saturn wandered in from one of these satellite galaxies. All such claims face overwhelming problems. Something wandering in would have to wander more slowly than the escape velocity of our system, which would require gargantuan quantities of time. The Ganymede hypothesis, with its claim of a local creation for everything we see in our system now, is at least possible. Galaxy strings. On a very much larger scale, Birkeland currents create strings of galaxies at their pinch points. This is the exact same phenomenon, just at a hugely greater scale. Standard science theories have no explanation for a string of galaxies. At least that is how stars appear to form up. What about rocky bodies, planets such as Earth or Mars? It is conceivable that such planets could also form up as parts of Herbig-Haro strings, but much more likely seems to be the kind of scenario that Immanuel Velikovsky and Altagracia described, in which such bodies would be fissioned off by a dwarf star as a mechanism for relieving electrical stress. Hence, Troy McLaughlin's interpretation of such a dwarf star-centered system in which rocky bodies like Earth or Mars exist within the plasma sheath heliosphere of a dwarf star, with the outside universe basically hidden from them by that opaque plasma heliosphere. One part of the idea is that such a planet would have a radiant energy coming in from all sides as it bounced off the interior of that plasma heliosphere. You wouldn't freeze to death, but the entire middle part of the light spectrum would simply be missing. You'd be living in a deep, dark, purplish sort of a world, which the oldest oral traditions on Earth describe as a purple dawn. You might expect the creatures of such a world to have huge eyes. In fact, they all did. The eyes you observe with dinosaur and hominid remains are adaptations for such a darkish environment. Again, leftover creatures of that age, tarsiers, lemurs, owls, and the like, retain those kinds of eyes. Neanderthal eye sockets are very much larger than ours. Accurate reproductions, such as those of Ganymede, show the Neanderthal to be a fabulously bug-eyed creature. Ganymede reconstructions, in fact, show the Neanderthal with a fur coat. Early human needles are common, but nobody's ever found the first Neanderthal needle, because a creature with a 6-inch fur coat does not require needles. If you're worried about having anything like that in your family tree, you can stop worrying. The idea of any kind of a hominid to human evolution simply does not pass a basic sniff test for logic. For any hominid to have ever evolved into a human, that hominid would have to have lost everything he needed to live, thrive, and survive. Particularly, he would have to have lost 1, his fur while ice ages were in progress, 2, almost all of his night vision, 3, almost all of his sense of smell, and all of that while trying to make it as a land prey animal. That's not much of a plan. Rob Gargett, who calls himself the subversive archaeologist, notes that even if you try to draw a more yuppified or humanized Neanderthal with the nose and eyes as large as the bones indicate they would have to be, what you end up with is still outlandish. Now, humans and dolphins have the smallest relative eye sizes of advanced creatures. For this reason and a number of others, at least a few scholars, Lloyd Pye, for example, have determined that humans could not have originated on this planet. Eye sizes, in fact, amount to one of the main motivations for the Ganymede hypothesis. Those motivations are planetary axis tilts, which we've been over, eye sizes, human aquatic adaptations, human physical limitations and safety requirements, Given any reasonable theory as to how a solar system like ours would form up, you would expect the spin axes of the planets to all be roughly perpendicular to the plane of the system. Again, that's not what we see. As you can easily imagine, this capture of the southern system had to have gotten the attention of everybody living within the system at that time. This was the root cause of the various catastrophes that you read about in the Bible as well as other ancient literature. The other thing all of this implies is that prior to that capture event, our system existed in the form of a double system, a very bright northern part consisting of the Sun, Jupiter, and Mercury, and the very dark southern system consisting of Saturn, which was a dwarf star prior to the capture, and Earth, Mars, and possibly other bodies aligned with Saturn or in orbit around it. Given that picture and what we just went over regarding humans and their smallish eyes, you would have to at least suspect that humans would have originated in the bright part of the double system and not in the dark part. The thing about aquatic adaptations. Elaine Morgan listed 100 or so traits which we share with other aquatic mammals, but there are a few which stand out. Voluntary control of breathing is an adaptation for swimming and diving, particularly swimming underwater. We take that for granted, but monkeys and apes do not have it. That's the only reason they cannot teach chimps or gorillas to speak English. They can be taught to communicate using deaf signs perfectly well. Face-to-face sex. Marine mammals do that. Land animals generally don't. Shoulders adapted for swim strokes. The motion to swim, the basic human swimming stroke, is the same as to throw something overhand, like a javelin or possibly to use an atlatl. Humans have that. Primates and hominids never did. That is why Neanderthals were limited to thrusting spears while humans had atlatls and javelins. Whenever you see a chimp or a gorilla throwing something, it's always sidearm, as if you were throwing a frisbee. You won't see them throw things the way humans do overhead. Lack of a decent sense of smell. All land prey animals have vastly better senses of smell than humans do, and would go extinct very quickly if they did not. The sense of smell is not terribly important to an aquatic mammal. Again, Elaine Morgan lists something like 100 such aquatic traits. Elaine Morgan's aquatic ape theory can be viewed two ways. Viewed as a new version of evolutionism, it is just another flavor of BS. Viewed as a theory of human adaptation, it is the best theory that's ever come down the road, but it's never gotten any traction in academia, and there are two reasons for that. Number one, there's no fossil evidence of any sort of an aquatic ape ever having lived on this planet, and number two, there's never been a body of water on this planet which would be safe for humans to live in. It's a perfectly good theory, it just needs a different kind of a world to happen on. An original human home world would need four things. It would have to be bright, the relatively tiny human eyes. It would have to be warm, the lack of fur. It would have to be wet, the aquatic adaptations, and it would have to be safe, both from sea monsters and from cosmic radiation. As noted above, an original home world within our system would pretty much have to have been in the bright northern part of the system and not within the dark southern Saturnian part. I mentioned that Jupiter would have been up close to the Sun prior to the capture of the other bodies, and that Ganymede, just slightly smaller than Mars, would have been a fresh water ocean world under those circumstances. That is the beginning of the Ganymede hypothesis. The standard claim of Ganymede having a massive outer mantle of salt water is bogus. There's little or no sodium around Ganymede. The lighter outer mantle needed for the ultra-low moment of inertia is pumice and not some vast outer mantle of water. The place originally was a water world with islands and floating bergs of pumice and luxuriant vegetation.